After creating rotational throwing for numbies, I felt it was necessary. I shouldn't say necessary. I felt it would be valuable for those who were trying to develop high-level throwing capabilities in their son daughter. Throwing is not unique to the male species, um, and so there was additional information that came into being as a result of forums and discussing how to develop high-level throwing, and that led to Teach Your Son How to Throw the Expletive Out of the Baseball. Um, as I said, this was created after rotational throwing numbies. It's intended to be a more parent-centric or coach-centric, from a standpoint of coach-centric, meaning um, the information here is applicable to all levels, whether it's little league to major league, but try to tailor it more from a parent or younger coach teaching players how to throw a baseball. But as you'll see as I go through this introduction, it doesn't lack for technical significance or component. Again, we start all separate publications with a go to next page, and as I said, if you've read the rotational throwing for numbies introduction, typically what happens, you'll go through an introductory phase where there's a lot of me talking on each page about what you're going to see in this ebook and how it's going to be presented. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go quickly through until I come to the table of contents without interrupting or without trying to talk over what's being presented.
Hello, my name is Paul Nyman, and I'd like to welcome you to SEPPRO's Teach Your Son How to Throw the Blankety Blank Out of the Baseball. I began SEPPRO 15 years ago with the thought that there was a better way to develop high-level swing capabilities using training methods and concepts from other sports which had done a much better job of studying the science of how to develop world-class athletes than what is typically found in baseball coaching and instruction. My first efforts concentrated on developing sport-specific training systems for swing and throw development, but in order to develop the best swing and throw training products, you have to know everything possible about how the body swings and throws. Finding your way around Teach Your Son How to Throw the Expletive Out of the Baseball is relatively straightforward. On the right-hand side of each page, you'll see three buttons: Next Page, Previous Page, and TOC. The Next Page button, when pressed with your mouse, will bring you to the next page of the publication. This ebook presentation follows in the footsteps of rotational throwing for numbies. Rotational throwing for numbies has been universally acclaimed by those who have bought it, those who have seen it, as the best work that they have seen in terms of understanding or presenting what's necessary to understand about maximally throwing a baseball, whether you're an infield position, outfield position, or pitching position. Rotational throwing for numbies is a very detailed, in-depth look at the entire throwing process. It's intended for instructor-type people. It's intended for those who work with players on an ongoing basis. It's intended for the very serious parent. This publication, Teach Your Son to Throw the Blankety Blank Out of the Baseball, is structured much more for the parent. It's less emphasis on the theoretical, if you will, of the physics of. This ebook is about teaching your son how to maximally throw the baseball. Some of you may believe that throwing is something we're born to do. Nothing could be further from the truth. There are very few born movements. If there are born movements, they are more along the lines of posture, walking, holding ourselves erect, which are a result of evolution and are buried within our neuromuscular system. 3D simulations of the swing and throw have been a vital and integral part of SEPPRO presentations since 2002. These simulations are important for at least two reasons. First and foremost, it is through the simulations that I have developed a much better understanding of how the body swings and throws. Because in order to create a simulation, I have to understand how each body part works in both space and time. The two simulations that you see playing right now on this page represent about 600 man-hours worth of work over a 5-year period of time. Throwing can be viewed as consisting of three components: mechanics, physicals, and mental. Mechanics can also be viewed as the technique of throwing, the sequence of movement that results in throwing of the baseball. The physicals of throwing refers to how the body actually creates the forces and movement necessary to throw the baseball. Mental refers to the intent to throw, how the nervous system creates the movement and the mechanics to throw the baseball. Teacher.
All right, so we've arrived at the table of contents, and if you've gone over the rotational throwing for numbers, you can see this is different. There's only one section, and it's broken up into chapters. Basic elements of throwing, understanding the physics of throwing, understanding the physiology of throwing, pitching, throwing, so on and so forth. All the way to how to do video analysis. Again, this is an adjunct to rotational throwing for numbies. It is a little bit more, not a little bit, it's more specific to a person who has less of a responsibility for teaching from a standpoint of either high-level coaching and or running an instructing facility. I want to emphasize the material in this is as important as what's in rotational throwing for numbies. It's additional stuff. Again, this came out about 3 or 4 years after rotational throwing for numbies, so there was new stuff that I learned, or not learned, but I learned. I said that this was more geared toward the rotational teacher's son how to throw the blankety blank out the baseball is more geared toward the parent, but there are some interesting technological twists. As an example, I don't know if you want to call it get carried away, but this was something new to the publications, and I think something very important. It's about the physics of throwing, and this is what I consider one of the more interesting simulations that I've done. It's also one of the more unique ones because what it shows is that it's not force, strength, muscles per se that throw the baseball. It's about transferring momentum, and the strength required to do that is what's critical.
Welcome to Chapter 2, the physics of throwing. What I've done in Chapter 2, or for Chapter 2, is to create a throwing simulation using the physics tools that I've used in the past to simulate the swing process. To describe this in a little bit more detail, or what you're seeing on the screen, this would represent a top view of a player with a low three-quarter delivery. So if we look down on the player, this point right here is the center of rotation of the spine. This rectangle, and it goes underneath this circle, represents the torso shoulders. 3,900 degrees per second. So these are reasonable numbers, and you can see what's happened to the upper arm. It slows down because of the whipping action, the pendulum effect. So this would represent a reasonable approximation of what happens with throwing a baseball. Now the interesting thing is this also represents what I call a pushing delivery. And by pushing delivery, meaning that what the player does is tries to extend toward home plate. And that's indicated by the lack of continued rotational.
Let's go to the physiology of throwing.
Welcome to Chapter 5, Putting Physics and Physiology Together, the Biomechanics of Throwing. This chapter borrows very heavily from rotational throwing for numbies, but there are significant differences in this chapter compared to rotational throwing for numbies. First and foremost is the change in the structure of how I explain the throwing process. And second, I have added new and additional information which I feel clarifies or better explains some of the concepts presented in rotational throwing for numbies.
Back to table of contents. I even have a section on.
In this chapter, I'm attempting to put forth or give you some inside information on injuries and throwing. And
examples of typical throwing problems.
The player you see here is a 12-year-old. It's taken from an internet website where parents post questions about asking questions about their son's mechanics. They post clips, typically YouTube. These websites, as I've said before, are dubious in value. Usually what happens is there's 15 different opinions, and the parent walks away with the opinion that he wants to hear, or shakes his head and is more confused than ever. This player, this is
And let's look at one more
how to do a
section.
video analysis. In this chapter, I'm trying to give you the fundamentals overview of some of the ways, or a way to try and use video to better understand, analyze what a player is doing.
All right, back to table contents and some closing thoughts.
You have reached the end of Teach Your Son How to Throw the Blankety Blank Out of the Baseball journey. But as far as developing your son or player's high-level throwing mechanics, you've only just begun. Developing true expertise, whether it's throwing or swinging or some other activity, is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year activity. This does not necessarily mean that you're doing the actual event, such as throwing or swinging, 365 days a year, but it's always there. It has to be a passion, it has to be a burning desire, it has to be something that you truly wish to excel at. Hopefully.
In other words, we're talking about deliberate practice. So really, this is really the and this came into being before the whole concept of deliberate practice was popular or popularized. So again, SetPro's products, my philosophy has really been driven by the desire to excel, to exceed, and having that burning desire to be the best. Again, so hopefully this gives you a better understanding of what teach your son how to throw the blankety blank out of the baseball, out of the ball. And again, if you have a daughter, a position player, fielding, outfield, catching, all of this is as applicable. Again, there's no gender dis not disparity. What am I going to say? I do not presuppose that the male female how they throw a baseball is any different. Thank you for your time, and hope this helps clarify what teach your son how to throw the blankety blank baseball is all about.